In the beginning, there were no borders, no kingdoms, no maps drawn on parchment or lines etched in the sand. There was only the vast and tamed earth, oceans stretching into mystery, forests rising like living cathedrals, grasslands rolling endlessly toward the horizon. And upon this ancient stage, a new creature emerged. They were not the fastest, nor the strongest. Their teeth could not match the saber-toothed cats. Their claws were nothing compared to the raptor's talons. But what they possessed, quiet, invisible, would change the fate of the world. The power to imagine, to remember, to fight. This is the dawn of humanity, the moment our story begins. The first steps, the tale begins more than 2 million years ago in the savannas of East Africa. There, beneath the relentless sun, early members of our genus, Homo habilis, the handyman, chipped away at stones, shaping sharp edges to cut meat from bone. These were the first known tools made by human hands, and with them, the first spark of technology was lit. The world they inhabited was raw and dangerous. Predators prowled at night. The seasons swung between extremes of drought and rain. Survival demanded not only strength, but adaptability. Those who learned to craft tools gained an advantage, and those who could share that knowledge. Through primitive sounds and gestures planted the seeds of language. Over millennia, evolution shaped our bodies and minds. Brains grew larger, hands more skillful. Our ancestors learned to walk fully upright, freeing their arms to carry food, children. And eventually, ideas, the gift of fire somewhere in this long expanse of time. A great leap occurred, the harnessing of fire. It may have begun as an accident, lightning striking a tree, a branch smoldering after a volcanic eruption. But curiosity turned accident into mastery. Humans learned to keep the flames alive, to feed them with wood, to control their size. Fire was more than warmth in the cold nights. It was safety from predators, a forge for new tools, and a kitchen that unlocked the nutrition hidden in food. Cooking softened roots, released calories, and made meat easier to chew and digest, fueling brain growth. Round the fire, under the starlit sky, our ancestors may have spoken their first true stories, tales of the hunt, of ancestors, of spirits unseen, waves of wanderers for hundreds of thousands of years. Humanity was nomadic. We followed the herds, moved with the seasons, drank where rivers ran. Yet something restless stirred in us, a drive to explore beyond the horizon. Round 60,000, 70,000 years ago, small bands of Homo sapiens began a journey that would carry them far beyond Africa. They crossed deserts, sailed along coastlines, braved the icy steppes, slowly, over generations. They peopled the world. Into the Middle East they went, mingling with the last of the Neanderthals. Into Asia they adapted to jungles and high plateaus. Into Europe they painted on the walls of caves like Lascaux, scenes of bison and horses, visions of a life bound to nature's pulse. Into Australia they arrived by sea, carrying with them not just tools, but myths and songs that spoke of the dreamtime. This great migration was not a single journey, but countless ones, rivers of families and tribes flowing outward, reshaping the map with every footstep. The silent revolution life as a hunter-gatherer was hard, but it was also sustainable. We lived in small groups, our impact on the land light. But round 12,000 years ago, in a fertile arc of land stretching from the Nile through the Levant to the rivers of Mesopotamia, something began to change. Humans discovered they could plant seeds, and the seeds would remember. They learned to tame wild animals, turning wolves into dogs, wild sheep into flocks, oryx into cattle. This was the agricultural revolution, and it transformed everything. No longer bound to the endless chase of the hunt, people began to settle. Villages rose where tents once stood. Food surpluses grew, allowing some to specialize, to become potters, weavers, builders, storytellers. Time itself seemed to change, no longer measured only by the seasons, but by the sowing and the harvest, the birth and death of generations in one place. The first societies, with settlements came complexity and conflict. Land became property, surplus became wealth. Decisions had to be made about who led, who followed, and how disputes were settled. In these earliest communities, leadership may have been shared or seasonal, but over time, hierarchies emerged. Shamans and elders guided spiritual life. Chiefs oversaw the hunt and defense. Artisans and traders exchanged goods not only within the village, but with strangers from beyond the horizon. Here we see the first faint outlines of what would later become civilization. Networks of exchange, belief systems, rules of conduct, and collective memory, language, and the tapestry of memory. Language was perhaps the most powerful tool of all, no longer limited to gestures and simple calls. Humans developed the ability to weave complex ideas into sound through language. Wisdom could be passed from one generation to the next, not just how to make a spear, but why a certain river was sacred, or what patterns in the stars foretold. Myths were born. Legends took root. In the stories told around fires, people found identity and belonging. These narratives explained the world, its beauty, its dangers, its mysteries. They connected the living to their ancestors and to forces they could not see. Seeds of civilization. By the time this chapter of our history closes, humanity had already set the stage for everything to come. We had learned to work together in numbers, to shape the land to our will, to pass on knowledge in forms that would outlive the teller. The next chapters would see cities rise from the dust, empires stretch across continents, and the birth of writing itself. But all of it, every law, every temple, every work of art, began here, in the dawn of humanity, when small bands of wanderers looked at the world and imagined something more. And so, from small bands of hunters and gatherers, humanity took its first tentative steps toward forming complex societies. Fire had brought warmth. Language had allowed the sharing of abstract thought. And art had opened a window into the soul. Yet there was still another turning point ahead. A turning point that would transform not only the way people lived, but also how they thought about the world, about themselves, and about their place in the universe. Time passed, and the ice ages came and went, covering and retreating from the planet in long, glacial cycles. Then, about 12,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened. Earth entered an extended period of climatic stability, a rare pause in the drama of geological history. Temperatures no longer swung wildly as before. The seasons became more predictable. Rivers flowed with familiar rhythms, and with this stability, nature offered humanity an opportunity it had never known before. In earlier times, hunter-gatherer groups had to keep moving, following herds or seeking new patches of fruit and wild plants. They were entirely at the mercy of nature's unpredictable bounty. But now, in many regions of the world, plant and animal life became richer and more stable. It was the perfect environment for some communities to experiment with a bold new idea. Instead of merely taking what nature provided, why not cultivate it? In the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, wild wheat and barley grew in abundance. People discovered that when the seeds they had gathered were planted back into the soil, they would sprout and produce even more grain. At the same time, in the Nile Valley, the future ancient Egyptians began to harness the steady rise and fall of the river, turning its silt-rich floodplains into fertile fields. Along the Indus River, wheat and lentils were planted beside the water's edge, while in the Yellow River Basin, the ancestors of the Chinese first domesticated millet and later rice. And it wasn't just the old world. Across the Pacific, in what would one day be Mexico and Central America, indigenous peoples patiently transformed a scraggly wild grass with kernels no larger than a fingertip into what we now call mali. In South America, potatoes were cultivated in the cold heights of the Andes in sub-Saharan Africa. Sorghum and pearl millet became staple foods. Every region, every culture chose crops suited to its climate and terrain, but all were participating in the same quiet revolution, the agricultural revolution. The domestication of plants and animals did not happen overnight. It was a process spanning generations. People carefully selected seeds from the healthiest plants, the ones with larger grains or better taste. They bred animals that were calmer, easier to manage, and less aggressive, keeping them for food. Milk, wool, and labor. Herds of goats, sheep, cattle, and pigs gradually became part of daily life. Once humans learned to farm and keep livestock, something new emerged: permanent settlements. Instead of moving from place to place, they built homes close to fields and water sources. The first villages took shape: small clusters of mud or wooden houses huddled together. At night, firelight flickered against earthen walls. The laughter of children mingled with the barking of dogs and the hum of crickets. And when people no longer had to spend every waking hour searching for food, another remarkable development followed: the division of labor. Some remained in the fields, while others became potters, toolmakers, weavers, or builders. Skills were exchanged, knowledge was accumulated. But this also sowed the seeds of inequality. Differences in roles, influence, and wealth began to appear. At first, women played a vital role in farming, having long observed plant cycles while gathering. But over time, as agriculture expanded, physical labor often associated with men became more valued for tasks like plowing and irrigation. This shift did not occur everywhere at once, but it laid the groundwork for profound social changes, one of agriculture's most transformative consequences was the ability to store surplus food. Granaries and jars of grain could sustain communities through lean seasons, but surplus also raised new questions: who owned the food? Who distributed it? And from these questions, the first forms of organized power emerged. Leaders, elders, or those seen as representatives of the gods, began to manage food stores alongside earthly authority. Religion entered a new phase. If earlier beliefs had centered on ancestor spirits and animal totems, now the gods of rain, sun, and harvest took center stage. People built altars, offered sacrifices, and prayed for good crops. Religion became organized with rituals, symbols, and sometimes a specialized priesthood serving as a force of unity, but also a tool to reinforce power. Agriculture didn't just change how people fed themselves, it changed how they saw the world. Land became property, and borders became issues. Conflicts erupted over water, grazing grounds, and herbal fields at the same time. The need for goods from elsewhere encouraged trade. One village might have pottery, another salt, another flint, and the first trade routes were born. Looking back, the agricultural revolution was a double-edged sword. It fed more people, brought prosperity, and paved the way for cities and civilizations. But it also brought disease when humans and animals lived close together. Pathogens spread easily. It created social inequality, warfare, and dependence on a few key crops. Even so, it remains one of the greatest turning points in human history. From wild wheat on the banks of the Euphrates, from tiny maize cobs in the soil of Mexico, from potatoes in the frosty Andes, humanity had opened a new chapter. From here would come the first cities, the first empires, and the first wonders of the world. The story of humanity did not end with the sowing of the first fields, nor with the taming of wheat, barley, or rice. Agriculture had given us permanence. Villages grew larger. Surpluses were stored. Hierarchies were forming. But this was still only the foundation. Out of these fertile beginnings, something even more remarkable emerged. The first great civilizations. From scattered clusters of farmers and herders came cities, organized governments, written languages, monumental architecture, and vast systems of trade. Humanity was stepping across a threshold that would define the course of history. It was the dawn of civilization as we tend to imagine it today, not just survival, not just subsistence, but culture, power, and legacy. In the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, something extraordinary took shape. Here, in the marshlands and floodplains, the Sumerians built the first true cities, Lagash, Erdu. Mud brick walls rose from the ground, encircling temples and houses. Towering ziggurats pierced the sky, symbols of both religious devotion and centralized authority. The invention of writing cuneiform was born in this land. At first, it was a simple system for keeping accounts. Tallies of grain, lists of livestock, records of trade. But in time, it evolved into something far greater, capable of expressing stories. Laws, prayers, even myths, writing, once a tool of merchants, became the foundation of literature and bureaucracy, binding people not only to one another but across generations. The Sumerians also gave us the earliest known legal codes, systems of weights and measures, and advances in mathematics and astronomy. They charted the heavens, developed a calendar, and laid the groundwork for the very idea of urban life. Yet their story was not isolated. Far to the west, along the mighty Nile River, another civilization flourished. Egypt, a ribbon of green amid endless desert sands, was a gift of the river. Each year, the Nile flooded, depositing rich black silt that renewed the land. Here, predictability brought stability, agriculture flourished, and so did centralized power. The pharaohs, regarded as divine rulers, presided over a kingdom where religion, politics, and daily life were woven into a single tapestry. The Egyptians built monuments that still capture the human imagination, the pyramids of Giza, the great temples of Karnak and Luxor, colossal statues gazing across the centuries. These were not merely feats of engineering, but declarations of cosmic order. The pyramid was both tomb and symbol, a ladder between earth and the eternal heavens. Hieroglyphic writing adorned their walls, combining art and language into a sacred script. In Egypt, death was not the end, but a transformation, and so they preserved their dead with meticulous care, crafting elaborate rituals for the afterlife. While Egypt and Mesopotamia often capture the spotlight, other ancient civilizations were no less extraordinary. In the Indus Valley, along the rivers of modern-day Pakistan and northwest India, cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro rose with astonishing sophistication. And like Mesopotamia's walled city-states or Egypt's centralized monarchy, the Indus culture remains something of a mystery. Their script is still undeciphered. We do not know the names of their kings or the myths of their gods. And yet, their cities reveal an advanced understanding of urban planning. Straight streets laid out in grids, standardized bricks, and one of the world's first known sewer and drainage systems. Public baths, granaries, and carefully regulated weights and measures suggest a society deeply concerned with order, cleanliness, and commerce. To the east, The cradle of Chinese civilization began to take form along the Yellow River, the earliest. Dynasties Xie, Shang, and later Zhou emerged in these fertile plains. Here, bronze technology flourished, giving rise to ornate ritual vessels and powerful weapons. The Shang developed one of the world's earliest systems of writing, inscribing characters onto oracle bones used for divination. These characters, unlike cuneiform or hieroglyphs, would evolve into the modern Chinese script, creating a continuous literary tradition spanning thousands of years. Ancestor worship and the concept of the mandate of heaven began to shape politics and philosophy, weaving together ideas of cosmic order, morality, and human rule. Yet the story of civilization was not confined to the old world. Across the ocean, in the lands of Mesoamerica, the Olmec people laid foundations for later cultures such as the Maya and Aztec. Known for their colossal stone heads, carved from single basalt boulders, the Olmec were pioneers in astronomy, mathematics, and ritual practice. They cultivated maize, beans, and squash, sustaining complex societies in regions once thought inhospitable. Their influence radiated outward, shaping the spiritual and cultural landscape of the Americas. Meanwhile, far to the south, the North Chico civilization of coastal Peru contemporary with the Old World as great powers built monumental stone complexes and developed a thriving culture without pottery or even, as far as we know, written language. Instead, they used quipu-knotted strings to record information, a system that would later be refined by the Inca. What unites these distant civilizations is not merely their achievements, but the common forces that drove them. Surplus food allowed populations to grow. Labor specialization meant not everyone had to farm. Some became artisans, priests, scribes. Soldiers, hierarchies solidified. Kings and rulers above. Workers and slaves below, religion. Once localized and animistic, expanded into organized systems with priesthoods, rituals, and monumental places of worship. Trade networks stretched farther than ever before. Obsidian, lapis lazuli, gold, copper, silk, spices all carried across deserts, rivers and seas, linking cultures that may never have met in person. And with complexity came fragility. Droughts, floods, wars, and disease could topple these fragile systems, yet the resilience of human creativity ensured that even when one civilization waned, its ideas lived on. Writing, law, architecture, mathematics, these became the shared inheritance of humankind. As the Bronze Age gave way to the Iron Age, as city-states turned into empires, the foundations laid in this era would echo across time. The rise of ancient civilizations was not just the story of kings and monuments, but of ordinary people, farmers sowing grain, artisans shaping clay, scribes pressing symbols into wet tablets. Together, they built the framework of the world we inhabit today. The age of great civilizations had dawned. Humanity had left the village behind, and in its place raised cities of stone, temples of worship. From the moment the first cities rose from fertile river valleys, humanity has been haunted by a paradox. For every triumph, there has always been fragility. For every empire that reached for eternity, there came a day when its walls crumbled. Its voices fell silent, and its monuments became ruins, civilizations, however mighty they appear in their prime, are not immune to time. They are living organisms of human cooperation born, flourishing, declining, and passing away, leaving behind memories carved in stone and whispered in stories. If we look back at summer, the birthplace of writing and urban life, we see a people who built towering ziggurats and governed vast networks of trade and irrigation. Yet their success was tied to the soil, and the very rivers that had given them life betrayed them when overuse and salt buildup left their fields barren. The same people who once pioneered human history dwindled, absorbed by stronger neighbors. Their cuneiform tablets buried in dust, Egypt, for centuries the eternal kingdom of the Nile, built pyramids that still inspire after millennia. But dynasties fractured, floods failed, and foreign armies marched across the deserts. Even monuments meant to defy time could not preserve the heartbeat of its civilization forever. In the Indus Valley, cities like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa displayed astonishing urban planning: straight streets, sophisticated drainage, granaries, and standardized weights and measures. Yet this advanced society, which left behind no deciphered writing to explain its fall, eventually faded into silence. Climate shifts, river changes, and economic pressures may have forced populations to scatter. In China, dynasties rose and fell in rhythm, the mandate of heaven shifting like the seasons. The Shang gave way to the Zhou to the Qin to the Han, each collapse teaching both the impermanence of power and the resilience of cultural identity. And across the oceans, in Mesoamerica, the Maya, masters of astronomy and mathematics, abandoned great stone cities that nature reclaimed. Patterns emerge from these stories. Civilizations collapse for many reasons: the exhaustion of their environment, wars that drain resources, diseases that devastate populations, or internal divisions that corrode unity. Sometimes, collapse comes suddenly, like a storm. Other times, it unfolds gradually, over generations, as fewer hands till the fields, as roads crumble, as temples are left untended, until one day the once mighty city becomes nothing more than a mound beneath the earth. The lesson is stark. Complexity makes societies strong, but it also makes them fragile. The very networks that sustain life can unravel when strained, beyond repair. And yet, even as civilizations fall, their legacies endure. The Sumerians gave us writing, the Egyptians monumental architecture, the Indus people concepts of urban planning, the Chinese philosophies of age, harmony and governance, the Greeks the seeds of democracy and rational inquiry, the Romans laws and engineering that echo in modern infrastructure. Even when entire cultures vanish, they leave fingerprints on the fabric of human progress. To study history is to realize that nothing is ever truly lost. Ideas travel, adapt, and resurface in new forms. Our own age is built upon countless fragments of the past. But history does not simply flatter us with legacies, it warns us. The threats that destroyed ancient societies still hover in new disguises. Climate change challenges the stability of our environment, much as shifting rivers and droughts once humbled ancient farmers. Wars, both hot and cold, threaten to undo the delicate balance of global cooperation. Disease, though tempered by modern medicine, has not disappeared as pandemics remind us. Vulnerability remains, and inequality, the division between the privileged and the forgotten, can fracture societies from within, just as it did in Rome when decadence corroded civic duty. And like our ancestors, however, we live in a world where humanity is more connected than ever. The rise and fall of civilizations is no longer isolated to one river valley, one kingdom, or one continent. The challenges we face are global. Our decisions ripple across oceans. We carry the weight of history, but also the unprecedented power to shape a collective future. Will we heed the warnings carved into ruins, or will we repeat the cycles of overreach and collapse? The story of civilization, then, is not just a chronicle of what has been. It is a mirror held up to us today. We are heirs to millennia of trial and triumph, to the genius of countless generations, to the failures and recoveries of humanity's long experiment in cooperation. Civilization is fragile. Yes, but it is also resilient. It can collapse, and it can be rebuilt. It can falter, and it can rise again. And And so we return to the question that began this journey. What truly defines civilization? Is it the monuments we leave behind, the systems we build, the wealth we amass? Or is it something deeper, the ability of human beings to imagine, to create, to cooperate, to care, to seek meaning in the face of uncertainty? Perhaps civilization is not measured only in empires or technologies, but in the human spirit's refusal to give up, its capacity to learn and to dream anew. As we close this exploration of humanity's past, we are left with both humility and hope. Humility, because we see how easily greatness can fade. Hope, because we know that even for ruins, life finds a way forward. The story of civilization is not finished. It is being written in this very moment, by the choices of all of us, by the way we nurture our planet, by how we treat one another, by how we remember and how we innovate. The dawn of humanity, the agricultural revolution, the rise of ancient empires, all were chapters in a greater narrative. We now hold the pen for the next chapter. May we write it wisely,